Oh, good evening, everyone. Hope you've had a fruitful day of practice. We use the phrase fruitful as opposed to sometimes good, right? Fruitful implies learning. I'm especially hoping you're able to let it all be as it is and at the same time persist, right? In guiding all of the practices this day, and there was a lot, I was kind of going back and forth. I was so struck by the Dhamma Chanda energy. That's the Pali word for having a zeal for the truth, right? It's really palpable. It would be ideal if we had a whole other day in the fall, though. So I'll start tonight by reviewing some of last night's talk because, well, it's a lot being here all day, and after a day's practice, sometimes the thinking mind has taken a rest, which actually is the whole point. So, but tonight's talk builds from last night's, so we'll have a review. We discussed last night a tiny bit of the origin story of mindfulness, right? Buddhism. We talked about what brings us here to mindfulness, usually some kind of suffering. We talked about what mindfulness is and what it isn't. And then we talked about some qualities that help mindfulness flourish: awareness, investigation, non-striving, and acceptance. Yeah. And particularly, I introduced the Pali word mana, the ways we measure ourselves relating to striving, right? The way we compare ourselves to some ideal, compare ourselves to others, and even when we think we're equal to others, we're still measuring. But you know, it's not a recipe, right? So we don't need measuring cups here. I talked about burnt out Buddha in relation to the dangers of striving. And finally, he talked about how the path unfolds, remembering the passage when the gods pour heavy drops, right? Beginning that flow of cause and effect that accumulates and gets stronger and stronger. And then finally, I briefly mentioned the 3 prongs of the path: mental discipline, wisdom, and ethics, and how these 3 are woven into retreat practice. And I think probably we've been sensing that today. We ended with a quote from Alanis Morissette, "Thank you, silence." And then now we've had a full day of silence, right? So maybe that silence offered a chance to deeply connect with and investigate your experience. See for yourself what's true. See the nature of your suffering and how it's self-created. And some of you are old hands at silent retreats, maybe brief. And some may find the silence, I know many of you do, comforting, freeing. And then for some of you, it might be the longest time you ever were silent, ever, I imagine. Including being disconnected from device communication for 36 hours. That may have been challenging too, and that's okay. Sometimes in the silence, suffering can fill the space. We're not having distractions by communication with others or screens. It's all perfectly normal, and it's wonderful mindfulness. So please, a show of hands. Who is suffering just a bit? 3, 4, 5. Who's had a few, yeah. Yeah, it's okay. You can, you won't break the silence police won't in your hand. Yeah. Yeah. So let that be okay and give yourself grace. For many of you, it's new. New things can be challenging, and being patient and kind. Yeah. And remember the distress scale, and even at this late date, if you're suffering and you're new practitioner, more than 4, please leave me a note, even this evening. And senior students as well, if it's over a 7. Yeah. So last night, I briefly pointed out that the cause of suffering is clinging or resistance. I wonder if any of you kept this top of mind today, yeah? So when you were suffering, did you remember to ask yourself, was clinging or resistance involved? So raise your hand if you noticed that. And again, silent, oh, yeah, look at it. So, an epidemic of clinging and resistance is rare. That's beautiful, beautiful mindfulness. It's beautiful mindfulness, yeah. Just to notice that. In Pali, the word dukkha is often used to refer to suffering. But in actuality, its closest translation is stress or unsatisfactoriness. And that makes sense, since when we suffer, it's certainly because things aren't unsatisfactory, aren't at all satisfactory, right? And the Buddha talked about suffering a lot. His whole focus actually was suffering and the end of suffering. It's the main event. Suffering is the center of 2,600 years of wisdom teachings. This talk might be called Suffering and the End of Suffering. And that's why we're here, right? We signed up for that. So if you bravely raised your hands, know that this is exactly what's supposed to happen. It's not always a vacation. Yeah. So this evening, we'll deepen our exploration of suffering. Only at a gathering of mindfulness practitioners do we have hour-long talks on suffering. You know what I mean? A rich topic. So we're going to discuss the Four Noble Truths, which are foundational teachings on suffering, if there ever was one. And you have stuff on your handouts in regards to this. We'll also look a little differently at the Four Noble Truths from a different angle, which might help us to relate to them better. We'll talk about 4 different kinds of suffering, or 4 different kinds of dukkha. Particularly, there's just one kind of dukkha that can end, because suffering and the end of suffering. There's quite a lot of kinds of suffering that we can have, but only one can end. And then we'll formulate 4 ways of working with suffering as it arises, both on retreat and in daily life. So 3 fours. The Four Noble Truths, 4 kinds of suffering, and 4 ways of working with suffering. Just reminded me when I said 3 fours. When my son was 4, we were in a Haagen-Dazs, store, and there were those freezers with ice creams, and there would be 3 sections with 4 tubs each. And he said, "Mom, 3 fours is 12, right?" When I saw that, it was 3 fours. I had that memory. My son is 26, so it was a really sweet memory just now. Yeah. So the Four Noble Truths. We spoke last night about the Buddha's journey and all the self-flagellation and how he ended up finally letting go of striving, finally by sitting in meditation to watch his mind. Right? And that long sit Apparently it was 49 days. I'm not sure how anybody kept track of that over some centuries, but that's what the story goes, right? It ended in what we call enlightenment or awakening. He saw the truth, and when he came out of his meditation, he said, I teach one thing and one thing alone, suffering and the end of suffering. And then he began to teach the Four Noble Truths, which is on your handout. I know many of you are familiar with, but after I review it a little bit, we'll look at it a little differently. So, first noble truth is that pain and difficulty are an immutable fact of life. It's a difficult journey. We talked some last night about it. Hardship, death, illness, old age, you name it. So many hard things, and we can't escape it. It's kind of like that saying, pain is inevitable, right? The second truth, though, is this one, and we talked about it last night too. Suffering is caused by clinging to pleasures, to things that we like or that feel good. Could be anything that we're seeking out that feels good. The third noble truth is simply that suffering can cease, literally cease, and permanently. The kind of suffering that's caused by clinging can cease, right? And that speaks to the phrase, suffering is optional. So there's the quote, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. It's really kind of a modern day Four Noble Truths quote. It's on a lot of bumper stickers, I think. And every time I see it, I think they must be a Buddhist. And that knowledge that suffering is optional is really wonderful news because it's so freeing. Yeah. And it's truth too, that's the critical one of all of these. Truth too. So I wanted to share some different words that relate to that second truth in a little known discourse. I love little known discourses. The Buddha used the word search to describe the source of suffering. He said there are three types of searches. The search for gratification, again, so that's what feels good, what we want. The search for being, and the search for a spiritual path. So search for gratification, those sense pleasures, as well as pleasant thoughts and emotions. The search for being is referring to searching for a self, an immutable self that's beyond time and change, something real and solid, someone. And then the search for a spiritual path is just that. We're all on a spiritual path, one way or the other, but so much of the time our search for a spiritual path is really kind of a sneaky way to actually have gratification in self, right? Because we think a spiritual path will bring us what feels good, and that will have us be a stronger self, right? You know, self-esteem, self-confidence, right? So the spiritual path is tricky. It's insidious. So the Buddha said, a practitioner, concentrated, clearly comprehending, and mindful, it's all of you guys, knows searches. He knows the origin of searches and where they cease and the path that leads to their full destruction. With the destruction of searches, a practitioner without longing has attained Nibbana. A practitioner concentrated, clearly comprehending and mindful knows searches, knows the origin of searches and where they cease and the path that leads to their full destruction. With the destruction of searches, a practitioner without longing has attained Nibbana. It's a different way to think about it, right? To know what you're searching for, what you're longing for. Because so much of our struggling is in these searches, these longings. With mindfulness, we get to see over and over again these habits, the same searches. Every day, the same searches. That's the advantage of retreat, because it all gets laid out if we've stabilized our mind enough. On retreat, there might even be a little window opening that allows that grip of clinging to loosen. Searching might become less prominent. So here on retreat, we have the chance to know searches and not to search. And when we release the searching, the body releases and relaxes, and the mind relaxes too. And he would go on to say that the third noble truth is the cessation of searching, so letting go of longing. And the fourth of the Four Noble Truths is the path to freedom from searching and suffering, and that path we call the Eightfold Path. And these can be quite dry, and we won't go into them here, but they're divided into groupings or prongs we talked about last night. The prongs of wisdom, discipline, and ethics. These are also in your handout just for fun. So that was the Four Noble Truths. Suffering, cause of suffering, cessation, and path. Four Noble Truths, right? So next I'll talk about another set of four things relating to suffering. There are four kinds of suffering spoken about in the teachings and discourses, and it can be confusing with so many kinds of teachings and meanings. So some of them really can't end, so that phrase, end of suffering, doesn't make sense. So we'll take a look at these four kinds of suffering. One of the types of dukkha he talks about is what we've been talking about, the dukkha of the unpleasant and painful. He would describe life as being like the axle of an ox cart that's off-center, having a bumpy ride. Well, life is a bumpy ride, and that pain is inevitable kind of suffering, the first noble truth, really. And he sometimes called this kind of suffering dukkha dukkha, double dukkha, right? Or like dukkha squared, right? The unpleasant of unpleasantness, right? Like it's unpleasant that things are unpleasant. But this kind of dukkha, it can never end. These challenges in life just keep happening. Life is inherently painful at times. We can't change that immutable fact of existence. So that phrase, end of dukkha, just doesn't apply because it's dukkha dukkha. Second form of dukkha is the dukkha of change. So that which is pleasant will at some point become unpleasant. And that kind of dukkha also can't end because change is a feature of life. Right? So nothing we can say or do, no magic wisdom teaching or 30-day retreats or perfect practice technique will prevent things from changing. And that is inherently unsatisfactory in all kinds of small and large ways. We can all think of a time when something was pleasant and then it changed and then it wasn't pleasant anymore. And just that change was unpleasant, even if we adapted to the change and we were fine later, right? It's just that change itself. It happens, we can't avoid it, it's inevitable, and this kind of suffering cannot end. And there's a third kind of dukkha that also cannot end. And that is that nothing of a phenomenal nature will bring lasting happiness. And by phenomenal, we mean any phenomena, right? Sight, sound, taste, touch, emotions, ideas, beliefs, careers, family, size of bank account. Nothing will bring lasting happiness. It's a simple fact. These phenomena just won't do it. And that's a form of dukkha, and it's an immutable reality. Cannot end, so that suffering and the end of suffering doesn't apply. Right? So far we've talked about 3 kinds of suffering, in which the phrase suffering and the end of suffering doesn't apply. The suffering of dukkha dukkha, the suffering of change, and the suffering of nothing ever bringing lasting happiness. So the 4th kind of suffering, though, it's woven through and articulated in the Buddhist teachings, is one that can end, and we've been talking about it from the moment we all gathered here, right? But it's often exemplified in the teaching of the 2 arrows. And the Buddha talked about it with his students. He said, everyone at times experiences the unpleasant. What differentiates a mature practitioner from a not mature one? And then he answered himself, because that's what he did. And these words that I'm going to say now are pretty, they're not modernized, so it'll be interesting. He said, when touched with a feeling of pain, the uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, which is a not mature practitioner, sorrows, grieves, laments, beats his chest, becomes distraught. So he feels 2 pains, physical and mental, just as if they were to shoot a man with an arrow, and right afterwards were to shoot him with another one, so that he would feel the pains of 2 arrows. Goes on to say, sensing a feeling of pleasure, he senses it, although joined with it. Joined with it. Sensing a feeling of pain, he senses it as though joined with it. So there's an attachment we're talking about. Sensing a neutral feeling, he senses that as though joined with it. He is joined with sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. He is joined, I tell you, with suffering and stress. So these experiences that we have that may be unpleasant, we latch onto them. That's that clinging, right? That's how we get joined. It's a beautiful phrase, join. I like it better than cling. Join. And then he went on to talk about mature practitioners. He said, now, the well-instructed person, when touched with a feeling of pain, does not sorrow, grieve, or lament, does not beat his breast or become distraught. So he feels just one pain, physical, but not mental. Just as if they were to shoot a man with an arrow, and right afterwards did not shoot him with another one, so that he would only feel the pain of one arrow. Sensing a feeling of pleasure, he senses it disjoined from it. Sensing a feeling of pain, he senses it disjoined from it. Sensing a neutral feeling, he senses it disjoined from it. This is called a well-instructed person, disjoined from sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. He is disjoined, I tell you, from suffering and stress. Goes on to say, this is the difference, this is the distinction, this is the distinguishing factor between the well-instructed practitioner and the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person. None of you here are uninstructed run-of-the-mill people. For a learned person who has fathomed the Dharma, clearly seeing this world and the next. Desirable things don't charm the mind. Undesirable ones bring no resistance. His acceptance and rejection are scattered, gone to their end, do not exist. Really dramatic words, lamentation, pounding. And we know he had quite a flair for the drama. But he's referring really to the slightest reactivity that we have to experiences, right? And that's why we're here, to learn how not to do that, how not to shoot the second arrow. Or in my experience, like, it could be a whole quiver of arrows, quivers right here, right? It's just like one arrow. Anybody have like multiple arrows? Like, yeah, I mean, when you're watching it, arrow of clinging, arrow of resistance, another arrow of clinging, and they can be labeled, clinging. Actually, they should be combined, because they are, yeah. And on retreat, it might look like this. So you're bored, and that for you is an unpleasant feeling. And typically, we respond to the unpleasant by making a problem of it, pushing it away, trying to change it and make it pleasant. We might find ourselves thinking about this, how disappointing this retreat has been, how you expected some insight or relaxation. That's the resistance. You become frustrated. You're not a fan of the way it is. You've jumped down the rabbit hole into discursive thinking, all of which increases your suffering. So those thoughts and emotions are the second arrow. They weigh you down, they double your suffering. Boredom can be painful and unpleasant on its own for some people, but when you add the lamentation, it's twice the pain. So learning how not to shoot the second arrow on retreat might work like this. So you notice the feeling of boredom, you investigate it, remember? Investigate. So not trying to change it and look for some secret fix, right? Investigate it. So you notice where it's showing up in the body, different parts of the body. You could just let the boredom be, but surround it by the breath. It might pass. But you see, when you stay with that direct experience of the boredom, noting and labeling each of the parts, maybe thoughts too, always redirecting awareness back to the body, we avoid the archery field. Not that archery field that's out there, the metaphorical archery field. That's why we train so deeply in being with what's happening right now over and over and over again. And when we get better and better at that, at being with whatever's arising in the present moment without adding to it, we no longer shoot the second arrow. Because we're staying with the original thing, right? So all practice is about learning how not to shoot the second arrow. Another example that I could use with regard to pleasant experiences on retreat, because we do have those, is the sound of turkeys, and that's my cling. I love them, and the gobbles make me, and there are turkeys here sometimes, their gobbles make me smile. It's such a pleasant sound. It triggers pleasant sensations and lightness and thoughts and emotions and memories. I find myself thinking where I might locate them. I imagine skipping a sit to search them out. I've devolved into planning and clinging, and because of that, there's a slight dissatisfaction with the actual present moment right now. I mean, where are the turkeys? I want them, right? Want. So even a pleasant experience can become unpleasant when we don't get more of it. And that's the second arrow of wanting. Recall we mentioned last night that clinging and resistance together are called reactivity. And, you know, that's the source of suffering. So we can condense clinging resistance to reactivity. Sometimes you'll hear me say that. Second arrow. So we can't avoid the inevitable pains and hardships of life. We can't avoid the changes, the reversals of fortune, or the fact that no phenomena will bring lasting happiness. These cannot end, and they go with life, but the suffering of reactivity can end. Suffering and the end of suffering. And when Buddhists talk about suffering, that's usually what we mean. The suffering of reactivity. Dukkha and the end of dukkha. Not dukkha dukkha and the end of dukkha dukkha. Because dukkha dukkha can't end. I'm just saying. So that was a little about first part of the talk, the Four Noble Truths, right? Cause of suffering, path to freedom from suffering, the idea of searches, and we just talked about 4 kinds of suffering, especially the kind that can end, and the teaching on the second arrow. And the next question is, how can we then work with the suffering of reactivity mindfully and perhaps come to be liberated with it, from it? Because, you know, we can, you know, talk a big story intellectually, but how exactly do we do this, right? So in my mind, there are 4 ways to meet suffering. 4. It's not on the list of lists. No, they're on your list of lists, but they're not on any other kind of formulated list of lists. Those of you who are newer to Buddhism, there's like lists and lists and lists. There are numbers for everything. But this is my list. So firstly, and listen up, the first step toward the alleviation of suffering is, we'll say step 1A, you must know that you're suffering. I mean, how many times do we go through our days suffering, but not mindfully? Like suffering on autopilot. Anybody like going through our days suffering, 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 but barely registering that we're suffering? Anybody do that? Yeah, right? Because we tend to push it away, ignore it, or soldier on. We don't like it. We don't want to feel it, right? But the trouble is, you can't heal what you don't see, acknowledge, and love. So, know that you're suffering. And that's where, you know, some of you know self-compassion. There's a phrase, this is a moment of suffering, comes from. Some students often tell me that seems so morbid. Why do we want to focus on our suffering? But that phrase is so powerful. This is a moment of suffering because it forces us to stop and acknowledge it. This is hard. I'm in pain. Rather than pretending it's not happening, pushing it away in various ways. Right? So step 1A, know that you're suffering. That takes mindfulness, right? And then, step 1B, so once we know that we're suffering, we must know our suffering. Like when we say, I know you, to a friend, you're funny, sometimes morose, lazy, quirky, irritable, but I love you for it. I know you. Right? So there's an intimacy. We be close to it, befriend it, know all of its ingredients. And the way we come to know our suffering with such intimacy is investigating it more deeply, not turning away from it, trying to stop it, or put a Band-Aid on it. Specifically, we're curious about its components, and the components will always be that triangle of awareness, because that's all we got. Thoughts, physical sensations, emotions, those clingings and resistances, maybe some core beliefs. So to know our suffering requires even deeper mindfulness, steady, consistent, longer practice, like this kind of retreat practice. At home there are so many distractions, and oftentimes suffering is in the background on autopilot. Here, we get to know that we're suffering, and we have the time and space to come to know our suffering and to befriend it. So, once we have recognized we're suffering and we have investigated, there are 3 other further actions or activities that support our path to freedom from suffering. And these are love, wisdom, and mental discipline or practice. Love, wisdom, and practice. We offer love and compassion rather than aversion and pushing away. We reflect on the wisdom teachings, the Dharma, so that we can understand its causes. And alongside and during the whole process, we practice love, wisdom, and practice. Especially bringing awareness to the body, as we have been doing if suffering is intense. I found this process can be nurtured in an orderly fashion sometimes. It can also happen in a random way. It doesn't matter. It's each one of these facets of anti-suffering, like, love, wisdom, practice, they're all facets of anti-suffering. Each one leads to the others. So after you've trained yourself to know that you're suffering when it's happening, and to know it, really to befriend it and investigate it and really sense into it, you can offer compassion. So love, step 2. Our brain looks good on compassion. Compassion practices have been shown to release oxytocin output, which counteracts the cortisol that's involved when we're suffering. Oxytocin is a soothing and calming neurochemical. As humans, we're hardwired to soothe naturally when comforted. And there's so many ways that happens, just even petting a pet, any furry mammal, gazing in my dog's eyes. I feel the oxytocin output, and she does too. It's a mammal thing. We can comfort our own selves this way. And we'll practice a bit of self-compassion later this evening, right? We have a choice with suffering. We can love it, offer compassion to it, or resist it, push it away, and try to snuff it out. And it's going to be impossible to find liberation from suffering that way. It will never go well in the long run. What we resist persists, We can't heal what we don't know and love. So self-compassion is a powerful action that counteracts our deep-seated habit of avoiding suffering, and it helps us soothe it, right? There's a downside to self-compassion, though, and the issue is that sometimes we practitioners can rely on this profound power of self-compassion and then not bring in the wisdom teachings and mental discipline, because compassion is so effective. It can be so soothing in the moment once we, develop proficiency. It's the oxytocin effect. It calms us down, right? And many folks, I find, stop there. So we can have a pattern of knowing that we're suffering, knowing it, and offering compassion to it, and then starting the whole process over again the next time we suffer. And maybe I'm referring to the same kind of suffering, the same issue, right? And it can go on endlessly if we don't bring wisdom and mental discipline to bear. Suffer, soothe, suffer, soothe, suffer, soothe. Not suffer, wisdom. And the wisdom is, what's the cause of this? The cause and the end, right? So we need to bring in, so you self-compassion, feeling better now. I don't need any wisdom, I feel better, right? So that third anti-suffering factor is wisdom, the Dharma. Those teachings, as we know, the Dharma is so vast, but this weekend we're keeping it so simple, returning to the invitation from yesterday. What am I resisting? What am I clinging to? That's the wisdom of knowing the cause of suffering. It's really remembering the Four Noble Truths. So we come to retreat, read and study, work with a teacher, classes over and over again, so that that simple truth is more and more ingrained. So when we suffer, we need to bring these wisdom teachings to mind. And just even that teaching of the Four Noble Truths, like, what am I searching for? That's a beautiful question when you're suffering. And we can recognize the energies of searching or clinging and counteract them with knowledge, right? And we can abandon them. We can abandon them. It's a matter of recognizing and letting go. So, and then the fourth anti-suffering factor is possibly the most important one, is practice. That's what we're doing here. Regular practice builds that stable and trained mind, one that can hold suffering courageously, so that it can be more deeply investigated, so that you can bring the wisdom teachings to bear. We have to learn to apply those wisdom teachings in a real-life practice moment, right as suffering's arising. It isn't enough, really, for it to be just intellectual knowledge. We need to apply it in practice for true change because of rewiring the brain. Right? So all of this put together might look like this. You begin to notice feelings of isolation and doubt here. Rather than pushing it aside automatically to look for turkeys or some other pleasant distraction, you pause and say to yourself, and this won't violate the noble silence, because talking to yourself is okay. You say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This is hard. Yeah. Step 1A. Then step 1B, investigate it, know it. Where does it show up in the body? A heaviness, a foggy brain, an ache in the throat, and then what thoughts go with it. Like, I'm not like these people, I don't belong here, I'm a fraud. You could identify the specific emotions, sadness, anger. And along with that investigation, you can cultivate a welcoming heart and mind, one that says, I see you, I know you, and you're welcome here. That works against the tendency to push it away, right? And then step 2, you can pause, put your hand on your heart or on your biceps, because these gestures release the oxytocin. I care about this suffering, or may I be free of it. Or you could find something compassionate to do that would be an act of self-care. Right? And you may find at first that you don't feel much compassion for your suffering, and that's okay. It's normal at first. So we just keep practicing, and the self-compassion muscles will strengthen. And an act of self-care actually might be something like turkeys. But that decision is only made after investigation and compassion. There's nothing wrong in finding joy to counteract big suffering. We just want to train not to let that happen so automatically that we overlook the suffering. We don't come to know it and we don't care for it, right? We don't look for the cause of it if we leap over to the distraction. It's possible that just that offering of compassion will soothe it. We may be practicing, we'll be doing some self-compassion tonight. You may be in the morning also do some. So either here on retreat or back at home, if self-compassion increases your suffering significantly on the scale, and that can happen, you need to discuss with a teacher. So then after it's soothed a bit, you can look for the wisdom then. You can ask yourself, what does the Dharma say about suffering? What does the Dharma say? Oh yeah, the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is caused by clinging. What am I clinging to? You guys have been doing this. You know this part. What am I resisting? Could be you're just resisting the emotion of loneliness. You don't like it. You don't want it. That's the second arrow right there. But we forget this all the time. All the time. Like, don't we? Do you? Like, all the time. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. All the time. I'm clinging, that's right. And then there's more formal practice that you can bring to it. So you're doing mindfulness all along this process and as part of the compassion and wisdom reflection. You can't do any of it without mindfulness, without the discipline to stay with your experience rather than pushing it away or changing it. So watching thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations arise and pass. Right? That's what you've been doing here, training your mind to be a good steward of the difficult. You could do it in a different order too. You could know that you're suffering and know it, and then spend more time investigating it and searching for the wisdom before the compassion part. That's okay too, especially if it's not big suffering. Inevitably, mindfulness along with wisdom will lead to compassion. So it's all about not putting suffering out of your heart, not pushing it away, rather welcoming it all, every part of your experience. The insecurity, the pettiness, the laziness, it's all welcome here. The carelessness, the ways you haven't met the mark here on retreat, the mistakes you've made, the emotions you think you shouldn't have had, all is welcome here. The selfish moments, the judging, the sleepiness, the doubt, it's all welcome here. This practice is about making your heart a welcoming place for suffering, for all experience. Then, only then, can you know it, heal it, and be free. So I think we'll do some self-compassion now. Yeah, so finding that posture that's upright, alert. And letting all that thinking mind stuff be, taking a minute just to return to the body. We say body in the posture, and then mind in the body. And when the mind is in the body, the mind can relax. And so bring to mind some sort of struggle that you may have had this weekend. Some kind of unpleasantness, and if you didn't have any unpleasant experience this weekend, maybe you had one last week, or maybe if you didn't have one last week, you had one last month or last year. Bring to mind something that's been difficult and let it not be right now above a 5 on the scale. Remember it as best you can, putting yourself in the place you were in, wherever that was. And then recalling the physical sensations of that moment. as best you can. Were you feeling heavy, small, tearful, ache in the throat? Feeling an echo of those physical sensations now, maybe. And as best you can, recalling thoughts that were happening during that challenging moment. Are they judging thoughts, clinging thoughts, resisting thoughts, striving thoughts? And then notice whatever emotions were happening and recall that. Bring that into your body too a little bit. So feeling an echo of the suffering now. Just an echo. And then place the hand on the heart or on opposite biceps and offer the phrase, I care about this suffering. This is a moment of suffering. This is hard. So just acknowledging. And repeat a few times. I have developed a way of this practice that's really timed with the breath. So as you inhale, you can touch that feeling of difficulty. Touch the pain a bit, just a bit, like inhale, call it up. And on the exhale, offer the phrase, this is a moment of suffering. Inhale and exhale, this is a moment of suffering. So we'll play with that a little bit. And then the next part of self-compassion is maybe the wish that we could be free of suffering or that we care about it. So inhaling, touch the feeling of suffering again. Just call up an echo of it. And exhaling, offering that phrase, may I be free of suffering, with as much heartfelt compassion as you can find. May I be free of suffering. I care about this suffering. And as best you can, repeating that phrase with a sense of radiating or outpouring of compassion. Even if you need to call a feeling of compassion that you have felt towards another being, it actually doesn't matter who that feeling of compassion was triggered by. It's still the same in the brain, you know. I care about this suffering. May I be free of this suffering. And another phrase that we use is suffering is part of common humanity. We're not alone. Just as I struggle with this loneliness, so others do too. Part of being human. And we repeat that phrase a few times. And then you might ask yourself as well, as kind of an addendum to the practice, what do I need? What do I need? What will help? What kind of self-care can I engage in that would be supportive? not distracting or numbing, but supportive. And the phrases can be interchangeable. They would usually start with knowing that you're suffering. So this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of common humanity. That's a feature of the practice. I care about this suffering. May I be free of it. And then a final feature might be, what do I need? What will be supportive? And resting now in whatever this has brought up. Noticing thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. Just noticing. I'll end with a quote from Hermann Hesse. You know quite well that there's only a single power, a single salvation, and that is called loving. Well then, love your suffering. Do not resist it. Do not flee from it. It's your aversion that hurts, nothing more. So thank you for your kind attention. This evening we'll have a walk. I know it's cold and dark. We'll return at 8:30. And if you need to walk in the dining hall or in Lax Sadler common area because the meditation paraphernalia has been removed from there, you can do back and forth walking in Lax Sadler. Or even walk up to the common areas in any of the upper lodges as well. I know it's cold and wet, so we'll see you back at 8:30.